Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. And the devil may drag you under by the fancy tie around your wicked throat. I've got no rhythm. And today I'm going to talk about the most important novelist of my generation. Too much? Feel free to tell me why you think I am misreading that. I'm talking about Colson Whitehead. I've just finished his latest novel, Crook Manifesto, a sequel of sorts to his last novel, Harlem Shuffle. And I'm going to take you through all the Whitehead books I've read to this point and a couple of touch points. So my first encounter with Colson Whitehead was with his first novel, The Intuitionist. Greg at Supposedly Fun talks about bringing books into his library as library builders. He goes out and buys books that he knows at some point he wants to read. So I'm not quite on the same page, but I do think sometimes of books as investments. So I'll go out and pick up a book by somebody who I'm not really familiar with, that I've heard something about. I think at some point in the future, it might have been good to have read an early work by this person. And that's kind of where I was at when the Intuitionist came out. So this is a paperback that I picked up in 2002, and Whitehead at the time, he'd been a writer at Village Voice, and this was his first novel and was well received, well regarded, and must have got on my radar. Again, this is pre-internet, 2002. I bought this. The book comes out in '99, I think. So it was out in paperback, and people are talking about him. And I picked this up, and it's a weird little sort of pseudo noir, and maybe that's how I got into it. I was reading, I was coming off my early experiments with Chandler and the early noir writers and looking for sort of more contemporary noir fiction, and this has a tinge to it, even though The Intuitionist is about a woman who's in charge of fixing elevators in New York. There's this weird intrigue. She's the first African-American woman appointed to the role of, it has it on the back here, the chief of inspectors, the chief elevator inspector, something like that. It's the first black female elevator inspector. Oh, sorry, not the chief, the first black female elevator inspector, Lila Mae Watson. So writing in the voice of a woman, writing in the voice of a black woman. We have Colson Whitehead breakout novel, and this was intriguing and fun and quite dense. And I got to the end and thought, okay, that's great. I'll put that on the shelf under W for Whitehead and park that and see what else comes up. And what came up after that was a series of sort of pinballing, pinging between different genres. So he has a book about zombies. There's a book about set in Sag Harbor, where I think Whitehead lives part of the time, which is sort of, it was, I think, a sort of social novel. Anyway, the point being, I skipped them all. I read The Intuitionist and said, okay, I kind of got the point here. Colson Whitehead. This is published by Granta in the UK, and I put it to one side and said, let's see. Didn't have high expectations. He kept publishing until that fateful day where he published a work of historical fiction, and it got picked up by Oprah. The release date of the novel itself was rushed forward once the news came out that Oprah picked it up, and went on to win the Pulitzer Prize. I'm talking, of course, of The Underground Railroad. This has actually got this. So this has got an Oprah sticker. This wasn't printed with the Oprahs. This was added on, and this is the US edition, which I would bought. So all the buzz around the Underground Railroad coming out, and the Oprah decision, and the rush release of the book, and I picked it up in hardback. This is September 2016, so it's, I think, pretty close to release. And that's 14 years after I read The Intuitionist, and Whitehead is all over the news. And I read The Underground Railroad just like everyone else did. If you haven't read it, you really should, because it's terrific, and not just because it won the Pulitzer Prize, not just because Oprah picked it, because it's just an outstanding work of historical fiction addressing slavery in America. The Underground Railroad in this telling is actually a railroad, even though in the real world it was a metaphor for how slaves were transported through the South to the free North. Just a fine piece of work, and blew up all over the world. And Whitehead becomes world renowned, and everyone's super excited. Now, I still kind of think that one day I will go back and read Sag Harbor. I don't think I'm going to read the zombie one or one of his other ones. But while I was waiting for another novel from Whitehead at this point, I picked up secondhand work of non-fiction of his, and this is The Noble Hustle, Poker, Beef Jerky, and Death. Best-selling author of Zone 1, it says there. So this comes out before, this was 2014, so it's before The Underground Railroad, but after Zone 1, that zombie book. So this is originally 2014. I picked this up in 2018 because I was waiting, I had a good experience. I got one novel that I parked, then the Underground Railroad, and I picked this up. And it's a story about Colson's playing in the World Series of Poker. So I'm guessing he was sponsored by one of those magazines, the kind of article that David Foster Wallace used to write when they'd pay him to go on cruises or go to a county fair or whatever it was, a state fair. And this is Colson Whitehead being back to playing the World Series of Poker. I think it's a $10,000 entry, and talks about his experience there and fun. I'm not a good poker player, but I've played recreational poker, but I sort of watch. I like watching poker on YouTube amongst other things. And so this was a fun book. I've read a few books about poker, and this was another fun one. But what was really great is that actually within 2 years of the Underground Railroad coming out, we had another novel. So Whitehead is now in the last. If the Underground Railroad comes out in 2016, one, two, three novels he's published since 2016, and we're now 2023. So that's a novel every 2 years. That's a pretty impressive rate, given that he probably could have rested on his laurels, and he's still teaching, I think, in different colleges around the world, around across America mostly. But he did not rest on his laurels, and he put out another heavyweight novel, The Nickel Boys, which is a different kind of beast, the Underground Railroad, in many ways tougher, and also incredibly won the Pulitzer Prize. So that's two Pulitzers in two novels. And some people sort of came on board with this. He's got a great author picture. I think he's just fantastic in that. And some people found this tougher. I think it is harsher than the Underground Railroad, but really powerful. Perhaps more accessible. I guess if you wanted to term this historical fiction, you could, but it's going back sort of 20, 30 years rather than 150 years. And I thought super impressive. I think on the whole, I prefer the Underground Railroad, but the Nickel Boys is a tremendous achievement. And then after that, we got a kind of sideways turn where we were told that we were coming out that's now 2021, that was 2019, 2017, 2019, 2021, we got Harlem Shuffle, where Colson Whitehead was going to be writing a sort of noirish set in Harlem, clues in the title, about life in the 60s in a black-owned business, and a series of characters and maybe vignettes if it wasn't sure if it was going to be a complete novel all the way through. And it turned out that it was actually 3 interconnected stories. If I miss my guess, part 1, The Truck, part 2, Dorvey, part 3, Call It Baby, about a character in Harlem called Ray Carney, who runs a furniture store, so a black-owned business in up-and-coming Harlem in the 60s. His father was a sort of shady, dodgy character who mixed in criminal circles. His cousin, Freddie, gets involved with all sorts of criminal activities, and Ray has this front of running a legit business, but actually he's a fence for stolen goods, and actually he's also got one foot in the criminal world. And this was 3 stories about Ray, about different times in different episodes that occur over 3 different times, moving forward each time, and things that happen to his cousin, to him, how he built his business, where he draws the line, what his morality is, how he manages to be both things at once in a time where wealth is becoming accessible, or at least a sense of a glimpse at the middle class and some kind of prosperity and ownership of homes, of businesses, is becoming available if you know how to play the game, if you know how to be part of the system. And that was the story here. So on the one hand, it's a light and breezy crime stuff, and as someone who reads crime novels, there were elements that I recognized. On the other hand, deeply political, both about we get Ray's standing within the black community in Harlem, and also its relationship to the white institutions of the police and everyone else, and how he's still subject to racism and everything else pernicious that is imposed upon black communities and in Harlem, in New York, in the 1960s. So I enjoyed this very much. I think more maybe than some did. I think some, it's not a heavyweight novel. This is somebody playing with genre. This is not pure noir, say, because it's deeply political, very smart, and the writing is just gorgeous. So I really enjoyed it. I think maybe some people coming out of the Nickel Boys or even the Underground Railroad, perhaps this wasn't quite what they were anticipating. And of course, that being when that's the case, the next thing Whitehead does is more of the same. So this is a continuation. We get the same character, Ray Carney, still running his furniture store in Harlem. A continuation. Now we're at the start of the 70s. So we have the Black Panther movement. We have blaxploitation movies. We have, again, the continuing expansion of life in Harlem, but also all the way through the relationship of the African American man in Harlem to the political systems that conspire to impose their will upon him, whether it's holding them down, whether it's mistreating tenants, landlords overlording tenants, whether it's any number of land deals, and as the city is expanding, as money is flowing in, it goes to the people in power and the politics, and the working man is sometimes shut out of that. And he's right in the thick of it, talking about all these things, and also playing with noir tropes. There is crime, there is some action. I don't think Whitehead is the greatest writer of action, but he gets the job done here. It's super entertaining. It flows fast. It's full of wit, and even if it isn't sort of as heavy and as terrifying as either of the Underground Railroad or Nickel Boys, I think it's a pretty powerful and successful novel. So I thoroughly enjoyed Harlem Shuffle, and I like this companion work. Couple of reference points that I want to touch before I get out of your way. For these books in particular, I think has to be Walter Mosley's series. And this is the first one, Devil in the Blue Dress, featuring a character called Ezekiel, or Easy Rawlins. And this, I read this in 1996 because Bill Clinton had been quoted as saying that Walter Mosley was his favorite author, and these blew up. And the first one was made into a movie directed by Carl Franklin, starring Denzel. It's quite a good movie, and it's a great story, and it never took off. There was never a franchise after this. So the first one, I think, set in the late 40s maybe, and we followed this character all the way through for the 50s and the 60s, and we're just sort of coming up to where Crook Manifesto takes place, but we definitely covered the time of Harlem Shuffle within these books, and so Walter Mosley is an African American writer, African American Jewish writer, and Easy Rawlins is on the West Coast, growing up is in LA, but we trace him over time and see the evolution of possibility for a black man in America in the 50s and 60s, and that's definitely the kind of register that Whitehead is playing. And I have no doubt that Whitehead knows or is familiar with this work, because he's a great author. I mean, there must be 10, 12 Easy Rawlins books, as well as 2 or 3 other series that Mosley's writing. Highly recommend if you haven't read Walter Mosley and you like noir. And then the other point of reference, I'm not sure if this is right, but I just wanted to bring up because it's an author that I've never spoken about, and I don't think anyone ever talks about, Damon Runyon. I've got 2 collections of Damon Runyon here, On Broadway and First Class, that were published in these Penguin 20th Century Classics. I picked these up in the market in Camden many years ago, in 97 and 98, so 25 years since I read them. But I mention them in the same breath as the last 2 books by Colson Whitehead, because they are so of their place. New York and criminals, and the sort of romanticization of criminal behavior. These are played much more for laughs, and here I think there is some humor, but they're fairly serious. Ray Carney is not a character who takes things lightly, and in Crook Manifesto there's a secondary character called Pepper, who is a kind of a hard man and enforcer, who shows up. There's 3 stories, I should have said, 3 stories in here, just like in Harlem Shuffle, and the middle story really brings the focus on Pepper. and it's fantastically written. I'm not going to do a plot or tell you. The writing is great. If you've got any love for great fiction, if you're willing to move across genre as the author is willing to do, then there's going to be plenty here for you to love. But anyway, so I thought I mentioned Runyon. Famously, these stories were the basis of the musical Guys and Dolls. That was that. Okay, so I think, as I say, Colson Whitehead is the author of my generation. Come at me. Take care. God bless. Bye.